There's just too much mystery in this world, and some of them have deep supernatural involvement. Stick through this video for a world of horror and demystifying the mysterious. There's something the movie Charlie Charlie and the game in this clip have in common. They are games you play to summon an unknown demon. Playing this game might be uncovering a mystery or opening the portals to something really dark.
The Russian Nesting Doll Game. The Russian Nesting Doll Game is a paranormal or cursed game that allows you to use a set of Russian nesting dolls and perform a ritual with them in exchange for one of your deepest wishes being granted. Disclaimer, this video is for entertainment purposes only. I don't suggest you try this at home. So it's said that in order to play this game, you need to have a room with no windows and a mirror that hangs on the wall. You also need a set of Russian nesting dolls, 10 candles, a writing utensil, an object that is near and dear to your heart, a piece of paper, salt, and a tub. So go to the room that doesn't have any windows and hang your personal object by the doorknob. Then set up all of the Russian nesting dolls, biggest to smallest, in front of the mirror. Turn around, close your eyes, and count to 7. Once you count to 7, turn back around, look at the dolls through the mirror. The smallest nesting doll should have fallen over or be out of place. If any other dolls are out of place, don't proceed with the game because it could go very wrong. I'm running out of time, but follow for part 2.
Watch the second clip for the concluding part of the rules on how to bring this game to its mysterious end. However, you shouldn't try this at home. We wouldn't be held responsible for the things you discover.
The Russian Nesting Doll Cursed Game Part 2. So only proceed with the game if the smallest doll is fallen over or out of place. Then take your piece of paper, write your wish on it, and open the second to smallest Russian nesting doll and slip the piece of paper inside. After you put the piece of paper with your wish on it inside the nesting doll, then close it back up and reassemble the dolls. Make sure they are all lined up perfectly or else it won't work. Now exit the room. Make sure that your personal item that you hung from the doorknob is still hanging there. If it's not there anymore, then don't proceed with any more steps. Next, it said that you need to burn the nesting dolls, so burn all of the nesting dolls except for the smallest one that you set aside earlier. It's important to make sure that they're burned down to ash. Side note, the salt in the tub were to be used if anything went wrong, so if anything did go wrong, then you're supposed to put your dolls in the tub and pour salt on them. But in the scenario that nothing goes wrong, take the smallest doll that you set aside earlier and put it under your pillow at night. The next morning, your wish should be waiting for you.
Why was Lizzie heard laughing at the time of the night when her father and stepmother were being hacked to death? This question isn't as important as why there was no physical evidence linking any physical person to the crime.
Thank you to everybody who requested repeatedly that I cover the case of Lizzie Borden. After reading about it, I now understand why. Lizzie Borden was a young woman who was living out with her family in Massachusetts in the 1800s. Her mother had actually died, so she was living with her father and stepmother, and tensions ran extremely high in that house. But what made this case famous was August 4th, 1892, when sometime that morning, Lizzie's father and stepmother were brutally ended, her father being on this couch. Her stepmother received 40 strikes to the skull using a hatchet axe, and her father 41. Lizzie is arrested, and there are a ton of counterclaims of people saying they heard her laughing at the time this happened, other people in the house who said they didn't hear a thing. But she was eventually found not guilty by a jury of 12 men due to the fact that there was no physical evidence that could link her to these crimes. She was given her freedom, and the Borden house still remains to this day as a horrifying staple of Fall Rivers, Massachusetts.
As much as serial killers go to hide their crimes, they always leave evidence to the police to sniff on. This is the case of this serial killer who was caught and had a shocking request.
After a long hiatus, we are back with True Crime by State covering Delaware, which of course means we have to hear about the story of the Route 40 killer. But before we get started, if you are loving Creep Time and you want additional creepy content, make sure that you check out my YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. In my bio, I have tons of extra content on there. When bodies started turning up, the majority of which were S-workers along Route 40, tensions in the state became very high as the perpetrator who was behind these acts was a mystery. But all of the bodies had one piece of evidence in common: fibers of blue carpeting from inside a car. An undercover female officer posed along Route 40 as an S-worker, hoping that she would catch a stopping car so she could find the man behind this. And then Stephen Brian Pennell pulled up, and he was initially very shy, he avoided eye contact, but what immediately caught her attention was the blue carpeting inside that vehicle. This was the guy. He was found guilty, but in a stranger twist of events, he himself requested the death penalty.
This story might just be yet another Romeo and Juliet true story, if you remove the fact that the mother of this story's Juliet was a classy lunatic.
Today I'm going to be talking about one of the most unsettling photos ever captured in history. In 1876, 25-year-old Blanche Monnier was scrambling to find a suitor, as many of her peers her age had already been married off. Blanche eventually met an older lawyer that she absolutely fell in love with, but her mother despised him and forbid they get married, mostly because he was lower class. Her mother begged her to end the relationship, but Blanche refused. So her mother thought she had the perfect plan to prevent this from happening. She took Blanche and threw her into a dark attic with no windows and locked the door. She told her that once she ended the courtship, she could come out, and she expected Blanche to come out quickly. And so for 25 years, she kept her daughter prisoner, only feeding her scraps. Sadly, 9 years into her imprisonment, her lover passed away, and she never saw him again. To the public, Blanche just disappeared. Her mother and brother even mourned her, even though they knew where she really was. In May of 1901, a Paris Attorney General received a letter describing the horrifying events going on at the Monnier house. They almost didn't believe it, but because Blanche went missing without a trace, they decided to check it out anyways. When authorities entered the house, they were met by a wretched smell, which they followed up to the attic. They couldn't even see what was in the room until they pried the window open, and what they were met with was absolutely horrifying. In the corner of the room was Blanche, completely malnourished and living in absolute filth. Once questioned, both her mother and brother claimed that she had brought this on herself. Both were sentenced to prison. Her mother unfortunately died 15 days into her sentence, and her brother appealed and escaped justice. As for Blanche, she lived out the rest of her life in a psychiatric hospital.
There's an untold story of how two girls who remained in their hostels when others had gone home for the holidays came to meet horrible fates. One didn't live to tell it, the other had a night to always remember.
The urban legend of the roommates.
Two female college roommates were staying in their dorm room during the university's Christmas vacation. All of the other girls on campus had gone home, so they were completely alone. The roommates were trying to do some study, but they ended up just spending hours chatting and watching old films. Late that night, one of the girls felt hungry, so she told her roommate she was going downstairs to get some food. She assured her friend she would be back in a few minutes. Then she took the keys to open the kitchen door and walked off down the hallway. The other girl sat in her room, reading her book and waiting for her roommate to return. After a while, she began to feel sleepy, so she undressed and got into bed. As she was about to fall asleep, she heard a gurgling moan coming from down the hallway. She froze, lying in bed, her heart pounding. The sound stopped, but it was replaced by a dragging noise. The girl was terrified. She couldn't lock the door because her roommate had taken the keys with her. All she could do was lie there, shivering, as the sound drew nearer and nearer. She listened, shaking with fear, as the dragging sound came closer and closer, stopping right outside her door. Then, something began scratching at the door. Frightened beyond belief, the girl jumped out of bed and hid in the closet. The next morning, the girl cautiously stepped out of the closet. The scratching sounds had stopped, but she was still too frightened to open the door. Looking out her window, she saw a mailman passing by and shouted to him for help. She heard the mailman's footsteps entering through the college dorm and coming up the stairs into the hallway. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped.
"Is everything okay?"
cried the girl. For a few seconds, there was just silence.
"Yes, everything's okay.
Shouted the mailman.
Just stay in your room and I will get the police."
But the girl was already turning the handle and opening the door. As the door swung open, the girl saw the mailman standing there, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. Then she looked down and screamed in horror at what she saw. Her roommate's dead body was sprawled on the floor, lying in a pool of blood. There was a hatchet buried in her head, and her fingernails were worn down to bloody stumps from scratching on the door for help.
There's always a disturbing sound coming from these woods, and why this person might have been scared to check it out, they record the sound. What do you think makes this sound?
Disturbing things filmed in the deepest parts of the woods. This clip, recorded in 2017, filmed in the Canadian woods, captures a horrifying scream coming from the distance. No one knows what the sound is coming from, but here is the clip.
hearing it too.
What is that feeling of déjà vu? Have you ever experienced it before? There are many theories as to why déjà vu happens, and so many are even scientifically proven. But there's always a feeling that it's more eerie than we care to admit.
Have you ever experienced déjà vu? The feeling of familiarity, yet with a sense of mystery. The sensation that you've been in a certain place or situation before, even though you know you haven't. For many, déjà vu is a common occurrence, yet the scientific explanation behind it remains a mystery. Some scientists believe it to be a glitch in the brain's memory system, while others propose it as a sign of past lives or parallel universes. There is a theory that states our consciousness has lived thousands of lives before, and when you die, the bright light you see at the end of the tunnel is you coming back to the world as a newborn. However, recent studies have shown that déjà vu is related to the brain's ability to process and organize memories. It is thought that the feeling of déjà vu occurs when the brain recognizes a new situation but cannot find the correct memory to match it with. It is a temporary confusion between the short-term memory and the long-term memory, but it still can't be explained by science.
This is the last footage of Lars Mittank, who claimed that there were men after his life, and he is seen running in this footage, but no one is pursuing him. This is the last footage before he isn't seen again.
People who disappeared and left behind creepy recordings.
Which of these stories did you find disturbing? It has to be the one where the girl sits left in the attic to rot for love. Let us know in the comments section.